Jeff Clark is being attacked because he's so strong and so good.
They are destroying and have destroyed the rule of law in America, and they were using our judicial system in order to prosecute and persecute President Trump and anyone who supported him.
The punishment and the pain that has been inflicted on him in his life is so important to the regime because they want to set a deterrent.
If President Trump had sailed off into the sunset, none of this would have happened.
But his key ally in this is this guy, Jeffrey Clark, but who is effectively plotting a coup with the president.
What was his only qualification? That he would do whatever the president wanted him to do.
Jeffrey Clark, who was fully committed to corrupting the DOJ on Trump's behalf.
When they raid your house, and they take all your electronics, and they're parking black vans outside your house, and they're following you sometimes, and you know your communications are being monitored, it can tend to have an impact on you.
I mean, Jeff really comes from, one of the interesting things about him is he comes from very much an elite legal background. He went to Ivy League schools. He had one of the most prestigious clerkships you can have short of the Supreme Court, and then spent most of his career, with the exception of his government service, at a very much a white shoe law firm as a partner at Kirkland & Ellis.
Well, the quality of his intelligence, experience, and how he handles himself is extraordinary.
We voted yesterday to advance the nomination of Jeffrey Clark to serve as Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division. Mr. Clark's qualifications include several years of prior service as Deputy Assistant Attorney General. He's also built a strong reputation in the private sector as a leading litigator with subject matter expertise in administrative law. Mr. Clark's legal colleagues describe him as one of the most capable lawyers with whom they've ever worked. Tell the Senate that his well-rounded background and prior experience in the division make him an excellent choice for this position.
When I joined the Trump administration, I became the head of the Environment Division. I was Senate confirmed for that. The Democrats tried to hold me up for, at the time, I think a record 14 months. Had a lot of very interesting jousts at my confirmation hearing with 3 senators, Dianne Feinstein, Sheldon Whitehouse, and Al Franken, of all people. Al Franken really thought he had some zingers on me, but it didn't work out that way. And then in the fall, actually the late summer of 2020, I was asked to take over the civil division as well. So I ran the 2 divisions simultaneously.
When I checked him out, people just told me that Jeff was a brilliant lawyer, was absolutely the reason that he was over justice. Under Barr is that he had this massive division underneath him, and he was one of the most respected guys from his Harvard days and law school and what he had done in his law firm as a partner. He was one of the most respected lawyers in the Justice Department.
They are tabulating the absentee ballots of Fulton County, Georgia's most populous county. A water pipe has broken inside the arena. They had counted 86,000 absentee ballots. We don't know how many more they have yet to tabulate, but all the tabulation of those ballots has now stopped. We're told by election officials they may not finish tabulating those votes for a day or 2.
It now appears there actually was meaningful voter fraud in Fulton County, Georgia last November. That is not a conspiracy theory. It's true. They are dead, but they voted anyway. The question is, how did they do that? How exactly did they cast their ballots? And the short answer is by mail. Dead people tend to vote more often when you make it easier for them to vote. They're like any other group. And this year we made it much easier for the dead to vote.
The state investigators found 140 violations of Georgia election code and laws broken by Fulton County. 140 violations.
At least 36 batches of mail-in ballots from the November election were double counted in Fulton County. That's a total of more than 4,000 votes.
Because of my background in election law, I immediately started looking at the manner in which the election had been conducted, and were there irregularities, were there anomalies, etc. And the more we looked into it, the worse it got.
What happened was, I, like many people, am a citizen of the country. I'm watching what's happening with the 2020 election. I'm looking at allegations about mail-in ballot fraud, about failures of there being no signature verification. And you just can't have that when you're having a massive amount of mail-in ballots, because you don't know where the ballots are coming from. And once the ballots are opened and they're separated from their envelopes, then it's not possible to tie them to signature verification ever again, right? Like once that moment passes, if you don't do it, sort of when you're opening the envelope right at that point in time, it's a very serious issue. So I raised those issues inside the department, and I found to my surprise that no one really wanted to do anything about it. The Georgia legislature had, through their Senate, convened a subcommittee that investigated the election. It went on for days, and they produced a report, and they concluded that there were very serious irregularities in the election, and that there was credible testimony that there had actually been fraud in the election. For instance, there were election workers who testified that when they were given stacks of mail-in ballots to count or to recount in auditing processes, the ballots were not creased, which means that they were not folded up and put into envelopes, which means they were not mailed. Somehow they were injected into the process. There were testimony about potential destruction of ballots when federal law actually mandates that for around 2 years, a little bit more than that, any kind of election material in a federal election be maintained so that you can go back and do the kind of analysis you're supposed to be able to go back and do. And just a whole mine run of issues were raised, and there were recommendations for further action there.
At the center of Mr. Clark's plan to undo President Trump's election loss was a letter.
Just days before the deadly January 6th assault on the Capitol, one of the ex-president's top Department of Justice officials at the time was circulating a draft letter that would have helped Georgia Republicans overturn Biden's victory in that state. Jeffrey Clark, who was the acting head of the Justice Department Civil Division at the time, wrote emails that essentially would have laid out a roadmap and given permission for Georgia Republicans to subvert the election results.
So the letter was quite modest. The letter indicated that the Georgia legislature could call itself into special session, and they should look at the report they had received from their own Senate subcommittee and then decide for themselves whether the certified slate of electors at that time for Joe Biden was actually the proper slate of electors or not. I mean, you can't imagine something that seems, more process-oriented, right, and more basic and more fundamental to making sure that the American people have confidence in their elections than a recommendation that a state legislature do a further analysis. And yet, the screaming talking heads on the MSNBCs of the world and the CNNs, they just went into apoplexy about the idea that anyone would suggest this.
I mean, he's making stuff up there, Jeffrey. He's just making stuff up, and he's doing it in an effort to overturn the election.
How is it a coup attempt to recommend to the Georgia legislature that they do more investigation?
And we now know Bill Barr was telling U.S. attorneys, notwithstanding what he said, he's in fact telling U.S. attorneys to stand down, don't investigate this. There were meetings in terms of the White House counsel trying to shield the president from people like Jeff. And ultimately, the president wanted to empower Jeff further, and it led to threats of resignation on behalf of these Republican Federalist Society type lawyers. And I think that's one of the major things that we're up against is those lawyers that just have no idea what time it is and the extent to which the left will go to steal elections.
I went to the floor of Congress where I spend hours with my colleagues every day, and I told them, I said, there's evidence being suppressed at the Department of Justice. They are blocking an investigation. I went to President Trump and I told him this directly. I said, Bill Barr is blocking the work that local law enforcement, local in the sense that they are based in Northwest Florida, want to be able to do. And President Trump wanted it investigated, and Bill Barr did not. And so anyone who was willing to show any concern about those allegations or willing to say, hey, maybe we ought to give some review to this conduct in a variety of matters, not just mine in Florida, those people were treated as like enemies of the state. They had to be driven out, they had to be punished, they had to be disbarred.
The entire Republican legal establishment ganged up against the president and the conservative movement that saw what everyday Americans saw in terms of voter fraud. And Jeff was the only one within the Department of Justice that was willing to raise his hand and work with the president.
Ultimately, it led to me being named as the acting attorney general by President Trump. And then there was just an immediate firestorm inside DOJ. And ultimately, there was a showdown meeting in the Oval Office on January 3rd of 2021. And there are aspects of that that are certainly executive privileged and lawyer-client privileged and law enforcement privileged, and President Trump has instructed me to maintain those privileges, and I will. But I'll address things that have come out at the end of the meeting when it looked like they were making no progress in convincing the president. They did what the deep state often does. They launched their resignation pact, and they said that if the election was going to be investigated further, and if I were named as if I were continued in the position of being the acting attorney general, that they would resign. They went to the New York Times and anonymously leaked, and they became part of the whole furor of the January 6th committee trying to destroy President Trump. President Trump did absolutely nothing wrong. At all times, his actions were entirely proper. They were motivated by a desire to enforce the law, to uphold the Constitution. Before the January 6th committee subpoenaed me, the Senate Judiciary Committee, because I had not come in voluntarily and because they didn't have the votes in order to get a subpoena issued given the 50-50 divide in the Senate, they just put out a report attacking me. They called it something like subverting justice. And then the January 6th committee, after that report was out there and they had that under their belt, they subpoenaed me to come in early November of 2021.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report to the House committee's report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Jeffrey Bossert Clark in contempt of Congress with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
I was approached by Jeff in mid to late October of 2021 to represent him in connection with the January 6th committee subpoena to him. We appeared in front of the committee on November 5th, asserted a large number of objections in a very lengthy letter. There ensued a letter-writing contest with the committee, which finally culminated in them lining up a committee vote to hold him in contempt. When that vote was announced, we asserted the Fifth Amendment, and they pulled the vote and did not end up holding him in contempt. And fortunately, as a result of that, Jeff did not suffer the same fate as Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon. The January 6th committee is the worst abomination and the worst abuse of congressional investigative authority in the history of the United States. When we were all in college, we were told in breathless tones that the House Un-American Activities Committee in the House and the Senate were the worst thing that ever happened. But those committees were properly formed and their subpoenas were properly issued. The January 6th committee was not properly formed, and therefore the subpoenas were not properly issued. And beyond that, they behaved in an abusive and high-handed manner towards all of the witnesses and really wreaked havoc on the constitutional rights of all the witnesses that they dragged in there.
I am deeply ashamed as a member of this government, particularly at the way you've been treated.
Before dawn on Wednesday, which is to say yesterday, a large group of armed federal agents wearing body armor with weapons raided Jeff Clark's home. They dragged him into the street in his pajamas. Now, what did Jeff Clark do wrong? Jeff Clark did not commit any crime. What he did wrong was calling for an investigation into voter fraud.
Around 7 a.m., there's this, massive commotion. Banging at the door, the likes of which I've never heard, and muffled voices. And the first thing that popped into my head is there something going wrong with my neighbors? Is there a fire? Are people like, Jeff, you got to get out of there as soon as possible? And so, since that was my thought, I just grabbed the dress shirt I had worn from the prior day, and I threw it on and I ran downstairs.
Can you step outside with me? We got a search warrant, and we need to speak to you. Can I get you to step outside with me?
Can I call my lawyer? Sure. Come on outside here.
Yeah. Let's step outside.
Just real quick, we got to clear the house, make sure it's safe.
I opened the door, and to my surprise, what did I see but flak-jacketed agents, and from the Justice Department. As it would turn out, I would find out they were from the Justice Department's Inspector General's office, not from the FBI. And also, there were Fairfax County police detectives. and they all looked to be heavily armed, and they said, we have a search warrant and a warrant to seize all of the electronic devices in your house. Please come out, and we're going to go into your house. And I asked to see the warrant, and they said, no, you have to come outside. And I said, well, let me put some pants on. I thought there was an emergency with neighbors or something. Maybe there's a fire. And they said, no.
Go ahead and step on out here.
Come on the stairs. Can I put pants on first? Sir, we got to clear the house.
We're going to clear the house. As soon as we clear the house, we'll get you talking to your lawyer and get some pants on, okay?
Can I open the garage and stand in the garage? It's a search warrant.
It's a search warrant, so just come on right over here.
Stand behind the cars and we'll see you.
While I was outside, I put my hands behind my back because I was thinking, I was just doing a little bit of pacing and wondering, if there were neighbors who were seeing this happen, right? Because it's at a time when a lot of people are getting up and going to work. And I thought about what are my next steps to get this warrant and complain about violations of the Fourth Amendment. And so CNN tried to get body cam footage from the Justice Department, but it turned out they didn't have it. And I think that's why they sent along the Fairfax police, because they did have body cam. They went to the neighbors and tried to get footage of what might have happened, from Ring doorbells and the like. They offered to pay, I'm told. To their credit, none of my neighbors agreed to give them any of that. Then they went and they used the local FOIA process, and they got access to the body cam footage. And then CNN decided to distill it down to one image they put in heavy rotation of me outside my house. And they snapped it in the point in time where I had my hands behind my back and I was kind of looking down thinking, to make it appear as if I had been arrested when I was never arrested. After they had swept the house, they brought me back in. I demanded to see the warrant. Again, they refused. And then I began to give them a lecture about the Fourth Amendment and how they needed to show me the warrant. So they ultimately gave it to me. And then I started to read through it, and I realized that it didn't say why the warrant had actually been granted. And so I said, it refers to an affidavit. Can I, where's the affidavit? I need a copy of that to understand why the warrant was granted. And they said, no, we're not giving that to you. To this day, even though we're now talking about nearly 2 years ago, June of 2022, despite demands from my lawyers and myself to see that affidavit, we have not seen it. So it remains a secret as to why my house was raided and searched. Indeed, after this whole incident, and when my youngest daughter, who was then 12, came back from Atlanta and nobody else was around, she sat down next to me and she asked, Dad, do you think the agents read my diary? And that really hit me, because there's no one who should have to go through this because of these political battles and these perversions of the justice system. And so I think that captures in one little vignette, how unfair, illegal, and politicized this whole process is.
To see it was really personally haunting. It was, again, this is a prominent, high-credentialed, well-known lawyer. It's demeaning on one level, but it's also meant to be intimidating for the world to see.
I love the law, and I've given my life to the law. I studied the law. I have practiced law as a litigator. I have made law as a state lawmaker and as a federal lawmaker. And so to see my profession weaponized and really just tortured in such a manner, it's very painful. It makes me feel empty about the work of my life on some days when I see what's happening to people like President Trump or Jeff Clark.
I'm here with the prosecutors and investigators who have worked diligently on the investigation of criminal attempts to interfere in the administration of Georgia's 2020 presidential election.
We were all indicted by the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis. And it was a very strange process, again, looking like shenanigans.
We found out Jeff had been indicted during the news conference that they called at 10:30 at night to announce the indictment. But that case, that began with a special purpose grand jury investigation, and that's a weird feature of Georgia civil and criminal law. They impaneled a special purpose grand jury under the leadership of Fani Willis and her boyfriend Nathan Wade, and they conducted about a 10 or 12-month investigation and subpoenaed people from all over the country, pursuing their vision of what they thought was a grand criminal conspiracy and eventually indicted 19 people, including the president. Normal law-abiding people like Jeff, who, when they are personally subjected to the indignities of the criminal justice system, which includes booked and arrested at the jail, having to post bond and so forth, that's a new experience for somebody like Jeff or me or you, and it's an eye-opener. The Fulton County Jail, we were only there for a little while. They did allow us to go in late at night away from cameras and get in and out in a reasonable amount of time and in reasonable good order. To be an assistant attorney general and then be booked into a county jail in Georgia is quite a journey. I'm sure it was very traumatic for Jeff, but he's held up extremely well from beginning to end.
And in fact, there are disciplinary charges pending against Mr. Clark before the D.C. bar.
John Eastman now has a recommendation of disbarment by the state of California, and Jeff Clark looks like he's swiftly on his way there as well.
The bar came after me, and coincidentally, what did the bar come after me with? They came after me with just a rejiggered subpoena, just like the subpoena that was sent by the January 6th committee. So it was very clear that they were coordinating with each other, and when they realized they couldn't get the information through the January 6th committee, they decided to use the bar process to get it. And so who is Hamilton P. Fox III? He is actually a former Watergate prosecutor. It was one of his first jobs, if not his first job, out of law school. So he goes back that long, and it's clear he's been involved in operations against Republican presidents for a very long time. And many astute observers have looked at parallels between how the Democrats weaponized Watergate against President Nixon and how the whole January 6th episode has been weaponized against President Trump. So I've been caught up in that, even though we're just talking about a letter advising Georgia that they could do more investigation on their own and then make their own decision. That's a pretty darn modest thing.
There are two specific charges. One is attempted dishonesty. I encourage your viewers to try to figure out what that could possibly mean. And the second one is attempted serious interference with the administration of justice. They're characterized as attempts because the letter was never sent. This framing is radical and unprecedented. No one has ever been disciplined in the history of bar discipline in the United States, insofar as we can find, over a draft letter that was never sent.
So basically, in the D.C. bar, Jeff is being persecuted, I would argue, because he gave legal advice that he thought was good faith legal advice. The president is the executive branch. I mean, basically, he's not just the chief executive officer of a corporation. He is the executive branch. And any of us who have been political appointees, including Jeff and me, are exercising delegated presidential authority. And so the question in Trump versus U.S. is, well, what's the scope of the president's authority? And if he's acting within the scope of his authority, then everything he does is immune. But what about the people around him? If the people around him can be, well, you can't give him honest legal advice because we're going to throw you in jail, then the immunity decision doesn't make any sense at all. It takes two to tango. Our government, if you think carefully about what's going on, is that we have taken the sanctions that we apply to places like Venezuela, Cuba, and Russia, and we're turning it on our own people.
The summation of the D.C. Disciplinary Council, Mr. Hamilton P. Fox III, argued that I was the most grave threat to the Republic since the Civil War.
He's unfortunately become a part of the intense politicization of the criminal law in our country. Legal scholars, and especially members of the defense community, have been warning for years, for decades even, that criminal law in America has gotten so broad and so hard to understand, and there are so many criminal statutes, that a prosecutor who's politically motivated could find some kind of a case to make against almost anyone.
The way you get power in this town is you help your friends and you hurt your enemies. And the DOJ is, I would say, probably the worst example of the worst features of that. Jeff Clark saw through that, and that's why he was such a threat.
It's shocking to me that you could be indicted and or disbarred for writing a legal memo. And that's what Jeff did. He wrote a legal memo. John Eastman wrote a legal memo. Now, I want everybody to just focus on that for a moment. That was their crime.
He has that same legal pedigree. He ran the environmental division. He ran the civil division for the Department of Justice. But he also has this man of the street ability to go and recognize what people are facing in their everyday lives and devise legal battle plans. And they just can't let him go into positions of higher authority.
They're trying to, this lawfare has many elements of it. Number one is to put Trump and Trump's inner circle of advisors either into bankruptcy or to put him in jail or to break him somehow, like they're trying to do the president. The other aspect of it is to, and this is actually a more advanced element of it, is to make sure that they take out the lawyers. Jeff Clark's, not just disbarment. I mean, the whole assault on him every day and the assault in media is a coordinated attempt to basically show, like Eastman, we're going to take out the best guys you have.
We will only defeat these people if we are sufficiently relentless. We have to exhaust them. We have to offer everything that we have and like shoot at the Death Star. We have no other choice, because to decamp from the legal practice or even our institutions would surrender the greatest country to the most evil people in it.
What we have to do, and we have to do it now. You cannot wait for President Trump to come back. It's going to be fine when he comes back, but we have to do it now. Unless we, on a constitutional basis, using the rule of law, go after these Democrats with exactly the same way that they came after Republicans and Trump people, then you're just going to have, this is going to turn into a banana republic. We have a duty and an obligation to the Constitution, to the system of government we have, to go on offense. And I think we have to do it. It's Jeff Clark's just one of many, but he may be at the top because they know if they take out a Jeff Clark, they can take out anybody.
It's not revenge to hold people accountable. The system requires that we hold people accountable. If you get away with it, if you get away with doing to Jeff what they're doing, if you get away with doing to Eastman what they're doing, if you get away with doing to the January 6ers what they're doing, many of them, right? I mean, in the way they've used the law, if you get away with it, the message is there's not a law. Just whoever's got the power is going to get away with it.
We have a monster task in front of us on the administrative and the deep state. And to me, you need somebody with intellect, will, and fight. And when you match those three together, the list gets pretty short. And Jeff Clark's either at the top of that list or near the top of the list.
In a word or in a sentence about what could be done, it would be to fight fire with fire. Because until fire is fought with fire, the Republicans are going to be attacked by this lawfare, and the Democrats are going to dance around with glee that they're not facing any consequences for perverting the justice system. And we can't allow that to happen.
And he has not put his head down and gone away. And that, to me, takes so much courage. And he's been brave, and they've been horrendous. But no matter what they throw at him, he stands up and continues to fight.
The sophistication he's got, and not just the sophistication, this guy's a fighter.
I think they expected me to cave, but I couldn't, I won't, and I will never do that.